views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. The city's zoning proposals continue to rankle communities in the Bronx, and we'll make that our first topic for discussion with tonight's guest. We'll also have dialogue about a variety of youth and community issues, campaign finance. There's also a study to give a hefty raise to city council members, and a variety of other topics that we will ask about. The phones are open. You can weigh in with questions or comments by calling 718-960-7261, or send an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, it is the colorful councilman from the 12th Council District, which includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Baychester, Edenwald, Gun Hill Road, the Northeast Bronx. Welcome back, Councilmember Andy King.
Honor and a pleasure to be here, Gary.
Nice to see you. And you wanted to make sure to recognize veterans, and that's why you're wearing your Stars and Stripes tie, so I'm going to give you the chance to do that.
Well, I just want to thank you to all our veterans, everyone who has served this great country to protect us. And as a son of a veteran, my dad was in Korea and patrolled the borders of North and South Korea. So he tells the story, you know, the trying times and the terrifying times, and not knowing whether or not each post will be his last post. So grateful that he made it, because if he didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here today, literally.
Right,
so
I probably wouldn't have the freedom to ask you all the questions I'm going to ask you. And I guess we should mention, just from real perspective, you hear everybody internationally talking about, oh, do we need ground troops, and 20,000 troops, 5,000 troops, and these are human beings that we're sending over there, and we use it so clear. Oh, well, let's just, we'll land 5,000 troops there, or we'll handle it. And we can never forget that it's individuals, and I appreciate you starting the show that way. So there we go.
My honor.
All right, now I did say we were going to start with zoning. The ZQA, Zoning for Quality and Affordability, and MIH, Mandatory Inclusionary Housing, all but one of the Bronx community boards who have voted so far have voted almost overwhelmingly against the plans. What's your thought about what the city is laying out for us here?
Well, when you talk about the mandatory inclusion housing, you want to. I know the mayor has a very ambitious plan, 200,000 affordable housing units that he wants to have built in the 10-year plan. But you got to have space, you got to have place, and you got to have the time to make it work. In the city of New York, what tends to happen when you want to build, you usually find those neighborhoods so you think that you can probably change the character of to build. I know in my district, they talked about, you can't build any more projects because there's just any more space. So that means you have to take space, rezone spaces. But when you rezone spaces, even though you're saying we're going to spoon just a little bit of this, but we have to do a whole inclusionary of being able to even build off-site. But what you're changing the rules. So we've learned that not everyone, once you change the rules, plays by those same rules. So if we grant you the power to change zoning after we had down zoned a couple of years back because the developers were coming in and just running the gamut of doing whatever they want, how do we trust today if we were to, again, up zone for you? We know what will end up happening. You end up building in communities, changing the character of communities where you have abundance of homes. Now you start making them 7, 10, 15, 20, 30-story buildings. Who wants to live in that type of environment, let alone when you start piling people on top of people on top of people, you occupy a lot of space. So it means it's a heavy hit on your infrastructure, where it's sewage, parking, where you put all these people who got to go to schools. I mean, you just changed the whole dynamic of a lot of communities.
There are a number, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of things that we're going to respond with. There are a number of issues that you mentioned. Now, in your neighborhood on White Plains Road and Boston Post Road, there are areas apparently that are slated for development. if they give them to affordable housing, and we've had this with the Stag Group, that they will say it's affordable housing, they don't market it properly, and then all of a sudden you have them changing, as you say, changing the rules midstream. If you don't do it this way with this zoning plan, how else do you, number one, incentivize for developers, and then number two, make it so that affordable, that's promised affordable, really is affordable? Despite the fact that we haven't even defined affordable, but that's another show. But really, so how do you do this thing?
You know, it's a challenge, but the thing is, I always like to believe, be honest in your plan. You know, if we need housing and we need housing that's going to meet the average median income for people, then let's have the real numbers. Let's not finagle the numbers that you can say a neighborhood, really the AMI is 60,000 when you know technically it's really 40, or say it's 125,000 when it's actually 70. So then who are you actually building these homes for? Are you trying to move people out of neighborhoods to bring new people into a neighborhood? So it's just, they just haven't been so genuine in this whole process. So everyone is skeptical. And then as they write up some of these contracts, you know, you have to almost be a wizard in the room to understand what they're talking about half of the time. So when you start trying to trick the conversation, then you've already told us that we cannot trust you from the start.
You know, I mean, you say that. We did a show on those zoning proposals, and I did spend a lot of time trying to, you know, I would read a clause, and I would read it again and say, well, let's figure it out. We get the sense of what your mood is. What is the mood of your colleagues in the city council? Because ultimately it will be the city council that will vote.
Well, the sad thing is that a lot of people might say, not in my neighborhood, not in my backyard, having those type of concerns. But we have to be responsible to how do we develop housing in New York City. And I've always said, you know, the mayor talked about recognizing that we have a housing issue, a homeless issue, but I keep it real. I always say, listen, if there is a community that does not have a homeless population or a homeless crisis in it, you can't all of a sudden just target their neighborhood, build housing, and then transport people in from another community.
You and your community have been through that for a number of years.
Yes. We never, the 12th district, the North Bronx, we didn't have a housing issue, but you found a pot of gold up there because we were homeowners. You were homeowners, grassland, connected to the state of New York, farmland before they started all this building. So it was a nice piece of private, and people have identified that it was up there. So let's go in and let's go in and tap in up there. And that's been our problem in the North Bronx. And how do we keep the look of the North Bronx while we still service New York?
In the old days for Mayor Koch, they were able to do it, and they were able to build middle-class housing. I think the implication by what the city is attempting to do is that it's kind of not possible because the developers can't afford to build nowadays unless they build and maybe only make 20 or 30% for affordable, and then they'll make a little more money if they make you know, the rest of the building you know, for luxury housing or market rate, so to speak.
There are a lot of developers who are well paid. There are a lot of developers who've gotten paid. There's a lot of developers that are sitting quite pretty. I mean, how many times are you going to continue to build and always have to make a 50 or 60 or 70% profit? It comes a point that, hey, when are you going to give back to the city who's allowing you to build? You know, you can't always go back and say, I need to make sure I get mine before I can build. And let's be fair about it. If we're going to figure out how to build because land might be cheaper in the Bronx, it's still not fair to oversaturate the Bronx. There are parts of Manhattan that you should be looking to build there. Why doesn't parts of community boards in Manhattan have to, they should share the same brunt of building as we do in the Bronx, so, or even in parts of Brooklyn. So I'm saying it has to be fair. You can't exclude one neighbor because they're the rich and famous or the wealthy and the famous, you know, and then figure out how do you gentrify other parts of the city.
Sounds like you're ready to vote no. It takes me a while, but I figured it out somewhere along the way. You did allude to the notion of gentrification, which may not be huge right now in your district, but certainly in other parts of the Bronx. We had what many people found to be a very objectionable Halloween party and all that. What's your view of that Halloween party? The borough president was there. You know, Carl Hastie, who's certainly in your district, was there. What's your vision about that going on in the Bronx, the desire to build up the Bronx, and yet the fear that many people have, if you do, the way it's being done, we're getting moved out?
If there's a genuine commitment to build the Bronx for residents of the Bronx, then let's have a conversation with our Bronxites to let them know that they're part of the plan. Not, because when I looked at the pictures and I saw the videos, I didn't see too many people from the neighborhood at that party. So that tells me that who are you actually, again, who are you building for? And we talk about gentrification like it's okay. You know, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You know? But where are you moving the individuals who are already there? It's not fair for people who've paid their taxes, not fair for people who've been struggling. It's not fair for people who survived to stay in the community because it's the community that they were raised in. Now we're going to build a new, nice waterfront of apartments, and I don't even get access to move in. Something is wrong with that.
Sounds like your agenda would be, let's talk to the people in the community first before we come up with a zoning plan or anything else, right?
It would be nice. It would be nice.
You ran a protest over a detention center that ACS wanted to build on Bruner Avenue. Where are we at with that? I mean, you know, we saw the protest. We saw that ACS wants to do it. Is it moving forward? Kind of give us an update.
Currently, right now, this facility has not opened. There is talks of relocating it to another location in the Bronx. And, you know, the close to home program didn't mean that you were supposed to put people right next to people's home. They wanted to take this house and put it in between two residential homes. So if I may... You have your home, you got your picket fence, you got your front yard, you know, you've taken care of your house, and all of a sudden someone says, we're going to put this nice detention jail right between you. I mean, how disrespectful is that to the homeowner? How are you going to take the property values of that? Because you know what? If my house is worth $500,000 right now, it's not going to be worth $500,000 when I try to sell it, and if it's next to a jail.
So do we don't know yet what their plans are or where it's at the moment?
Well, at the point, I've been told that they are going to look to relocate. They have not opened. They are thinking of, you know, weighing the option. Do they open and then move? I said, don't even open. Just relocate, because I know how it works. Once you open, then we get excuses after excuses of how the process is to relocate.
To try and get them out? Oh, no. I think that had to be settled ahead of time.
So
of course, I'm assuming you have sympathy for, you know, the ACS or whomever that is trying to do that, because they've got to put it somewhere, and everybody's going to say we don't want that in our community.
Well, I'll be honest, as I am always honest. I understand the close to home, you want to put it down. Either you put it in a manufactured district, or, you know, one of the things that I say, I'm a youth advocate. I'm into developing people, but it comes a point that you have to be held accountable. And if I commit a crime on 225th Street and White Plains Road, and my punishment after I go through the court is to get placed in the valley, how am I really going to change my behavior? Because the same people who I hooked up with are the same people I have access to in the same community.
So your question then is not only about the location of it, but about maybe how we're handling these kinds of issues.
Yeah, if it takes you to go send you upstate to you can get some new skills and some new ways of how to act, then return you back to the community, I'm all fine with it. But you can't just commit a crime and go to 165th Street and in the same neighborhood, then they place you back in the same neighborhood.
On the good news side, you celebrated RFPs for a new community center, so
yes.
We went on both ends of the spectrum. Yeah. What are you looking for when you see all the RFPs? What kind of thing do you want to see from program suppliers?
Well, we need it all around to connect our generations of neighborhoods in the 12th district and the North Bronx. We are the only district in the North Bronx that doesn't have a dedicated boys and girls space. You can go throughout the other.
You had the Edenwald Center, but that closed a number of years ago.
The Edenwald Center is a small center. We're talking about a dedicated space with gymnasiums, pools,
and
multi-purpose
Baychester
rooms.
Community Center doesn't.
And Baychester's Community Center is really a NYCHA center, so NYCHA manages that. We're talking about bringing in someone independent space who can provide program, that can offer space that we can utilize for community events. And so forth.
You are singing a tune that resonates with the people of the Bronx. I've been sitting in this chair long enough to know that's what just about everybody wants to hear about. Just moving it forward, the council has a package of campaign finance legislation on the table that would lighten up the definitions of lobbyists doing business with the city, so-called strengthening the power of grassroots donors. You supported the legislation. Why do we need it? What are the issues that this addresses?
Well, I think when it comes to Campaign Finance Board, the purpose of it is to make it an equal playing field for those who are the average, everyday, hard-working activists, such as myself, to give us the financial capabilities to compete to run for office, because running for office does require some financing. And as we've learned that some people have finagled or looked through the loopholes or didn't participate in the program and were able to receive money from people who aren't registered PACs with the city of New York. So in order to try to make the field a little bit more even, that's why these number of reforms have came out.
It's hard to ignore in this conversation. You were recently fined $17,000, forced to pay back more than $26,000 because of payments to family members. How does that happen? I mean, a mistake in the campaign? What is that about?
I'm a spiritual man, and all I say is the devil is busy. And I say this because after I was away when this came down. And what bothers me is that, I keep it real clear for everybody, they never notified me, the CFB never notified me that there was a hearing on my campaign audit. The part that they talked about my wife, about hiring her.
That's what they said, is that you'd paid your wife a fee.
Now, let's break down the CFB rules. You can hire family members, you just can't pay them with city funds. I raised over $40,000 to pay her what I paid her, which was a minimal fee of $7,000 for an entire year. That's breaks down about $3 an hour. Mm-hmm. So she got paid that, but then the total amount of money that she received over my 3 campaigns, a lot of it was being paid back for monies that she had, that we put out early because we didn't have any money but the campaign said you had to repay back, so we paid her back. So it's unfair for them to say that she was, like, anything was wrong or any improprieties was done, because by rules she could be on my payroll as long as I didn't use campaign finance money. So it was really disingenuous, and they don't tell you that in these things. And also with the phone scenario that they say I use. A phone paid for.
That's
a phone.
Right, from your home.
Yeah.
That you had paid for from your home.
Right. Now, the unfair thing about that's been my campaign line since 2008. So how all of a sudden the campaign finance board, who's been to my home where I ran my campaign out on my phone, looked at it, approved it, everything was okay. Now all of a sudden y'all going to tell me that I used it for my home when I have my own home system with Optimum, I have my own cell phones. So how are you going to say that that's the case? It was disingenuous for them to even say that was the case. So right now, I'm filing on Article 78 because it was definitely unjust of how this was handled, and it goes back to, I went through this in 2008. Someone told me a long time ago that, hey, City Hall has their hands in the campaign finance fund. If someone makes a call to make your life a little difficult, they will do so.
What is Article 78?
Article 78 allows you, when a final decision is come down by the campaign finance board, that you file this Article of 78, which is a level of appeal that goes out to another.
So there's more to come on this.
Yeah.
I should say that you have contended that your wife, it's not like you're just paying her. She has legitimate skills in this area and is a legitimate worker for your campaign.
She has been in politics.
Which is certainly possible.
She's been in politics for over 20 years and ran many campaigns, as well as being the Bronx coordinator for Mayor Dinkins. So,
we've had a number of conversations, and you've been on our show a number of times to talk about police and community relations, and it's an ongoing dialogue. It's a dialogue that goes through the country. I guess it boils down to all the time, whether we talk about stop and frisk or any other tactics. The city is now talking about community policing and emphasize that. Can the city balance community policing with the need to really crack down on the people who are not doing wrong, so that law-abiding citizens don't feel like they're being put upon, but they're being working in partnership with the police department of the city of New York?
I agree with community policing. Community policing in certain neighborhoods. Well, I put it this way. I go back in time when I knew Officer Frank. It was just one officer that managed about 400 kids. So, but everyone. I was
going to say those days are gone.
Yeah.
So that's nice, but it's not happening.
We knew it. You knew the officers knew you, and then there was a relationship, and that's why I started my Connections program with the Bronx Youth Empowerment Program to build that bridge between youth and police officers. So when, say, Officer Bell says to Malik, "Hey, I need you to move off the corner," you respond positively, as opposed to like, no one can tell me what to do. It's America, and you state all the wrong things, and then you end up having your face.
Just saying that, I know what's about to happen if you do that.
Yeah. So community policing, as I learned and met with my community officers, 2 officers, and there's 4 zones, and you get to see those same officers working in those zones. And if there's a bigger problem, then of course, you have other members of the force who shows up to those calls. But I think it's a way to get us back to a place that we can all be one community. And you don't want to continue to make communities of color a police state. Because, you know, there's attack. I was watching a clip of Malcolm X, and it just seems so real again today, how is when you constantly put in the public's eye or the eye of people who are non-people of color, that this type of person is violent, this type of person is a criminal, this type of person doesn't know how to behave.
Preconception.
Right,
obviously.
so now when you go in and do all that you want to do, you're not going to get any pushback from the other people because you've already set the stage that people of color don't know how to act. So when you've created a police state as opposed to let me go in and service, because it's interesting that you get some of the most crime where there's you have a precinct right there, and you got some of the greatest crime right around the precincts.
Training, and clearly, is an issue that continues to need to be emphasized, clearly, from what you're saying. One of the things we do on this show all the time, I like to propose or have our guests propose solutions. You talked about the Connections program, the Bronx Youth Empowerment Program. You see this as a solution. You've already articulated that this is one of the things we're doing. Why don't you, let's talk about solutions. What could other people learn from what you're doing in that part of the Bronx that maybe will help in other neighborhoods?
Well, when it comes to policing, you got to be engaged. You know, you always hear me coin my phrase, people pay attention to people who participate. People need to participate in their communities. You can't sit back and be the Monday morning quarterback. You can't sit back in your living room couch and just throw shots at people who are doing things when you're not doing anything. If you know that your community needs help, your children needs help, you have a responsibility to be part of that village that raised your child. And I've always said lack of funding doesn't mean lack of service. So because you're not getting paid to do it doesn't mean that you don't do it. Someone gave you an opportunity when you were a young person.
So how does the program work?
My program?
Yes.
Well, the Bronx Youth Empowerment Program, which I started, we're going into our 10th year. I'm grateful. And it basically, I didn't have any money when I started. Me and my wife started it, and you know, kids from ages 13 to 21, and we bring them together. We sit down and talk with them, give them our experience. We bring guest speakers in. We take them on trips. We empower them to be leaders. But more importantly, develop them as people because, hey, you and I were 13 and 14 one time.
And do you have a certain number that participate in the program all the time, and you run activities?
Yes, yes.
And I'm just trying to move it forward because we have a couple more things to get to. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a community center that you could run some of those activities?
That would be very nice.
I'm an advocate for that, boy. Put that on the top of my list. DOE is overhauling suspensions program. 9,000 fewer students were suspended last year. But you were concerned because you said of those students that were suspended, more than 50% were young men of color. What should be done? I mean, if a student breaks the rules and they've already dealt with how they handle these things, how do you weed out and say, well, wait a minute, I mean, he's a young man of color, maybe he shouldn't be suspended? How do you deal with that?
Now, let's get the numbers right. So I think it's about, black males make up about 36% of the school system.
Correct.
But they make up 50% of the students who get suspended.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with that right there. And I say this, it's how you treat them. It's how you respond to them. I've been in a school, and I've seen a principal respond differently to a black boy than to a light-skinned Spanish boy. And they talk very down to the black boy.
Sounds like the same problem that we have that you're articulating with the police force.
Right. So if you come into a classroom and a young black male does something and then a young Caucasian male does the same thing, but you don't give them the same punch because you know it hurts their record, but you push the black boy into something.
So you are saying maybe there needs to be more oversight to understand who's being suspended and why, or at least clearer rules on who gets suspended?
I'm saying you got to be fair. It's the adults that set the tone who gets I don't say mistreated, but it's almost like a mistreatment. Because if you treat certain children based on their ethnicity different than you treat others, then there's some discrimination within the adults in that system. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying, because kids do the same thing. A 13-year-old, no matter what color you do the same thing. So
I'm smiling. You know, I grew up in the Bronx. I know what's going on. I do want to ask you about this. The Daily News reported the city council is looking for what looks like a pretty good size raise, a 71% raise. They contrasted it with the 1% being given to cops, 2.5% being given to firefighters. What are your thoughts? I mean, is this justified? Would you support this kind of thing? Does this make sense? I'm sure you'd be happy for the payday, but what's your perspective?
The city council members, I'll speak for myself, and I know some of my colleagues.
I'm only asking you to speak for yourself.
Okay, we put a lot of work in, and I know that we put a lot of hours in, and we spend a lot of time that people don't appreciate. And should there be a raise for the council? There should be some raise. I can't say what level that will be. There is a commission that will come back, and then we will decide, you know, where do we go from there?
You know what I want to ask, actually, which really pertains to you in particular, because you were passed over for a chairmanship, as I recall. So what they're saying now is they would equalize the pay and the Lulus given for chairmanships and other things. So I guess you would think that was fair, whether it's that amount of money or not.
No, yeah, well, yeah. If you give it a real good salary, because I would say to you for myself, I give away about 1/3 of my salary on journals. People asking me for scholarships. People just asking me to fund this, fund that. I don't have a pot of gold or some political pot of gold somewhere I can just give money. So I give a lot of. I literally give about 1/3 of my check back to the neighbor.
That's true.
Yeah, and my taxes reflect that. So what I'm saying, I think that the city council has earned a raise, since they haven't had one in quite a while. Whatever that number is, I can't say what it would be, but we'll wait for the commission to come back and
I can't speak to that part of it, but you have earned another invite back here, and we hope that Councilman Andy King will join us. He's always an affable guest. He never tells me not to ask him something, and we go right for it. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to our communities. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show, or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, or put them on our Facebook page. We'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like Bronx Talk on Facebook. You can check out our archives at bronxnet.org. Bronx Talk is on the lower right navigation bar. In 2 weeks, on November 30th, we will have the new Bronx District Attorney, Darcel Clark, will be our guest. And a week later, the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, Carl Hastie, will be our guest. That's December 7th. December 7th. Get it down? Oh, you know, I forgot. The councilman has so many activities going on, and he's got a whole bunch of really wonderful flyers about home ownership, legal services, domestic violence, constituent service night. Check out his website. Call his office. Make sure you participate in those activities. Thank you, Councilman King. We'll see you next week. Good night. I got them all here, and I forgot.